Good morning, students. Good morning, one and all. Welcome to the third lecture of the course, Importing and Exporting. It is a good bet to claim that you have a decent idea of what import and export are about. Importing and exporting supports the development of national economies and extends the global market. But are you aware of its advantages and disadvantages? Let's have a look at them. Importing and exporting. Importing and exporting are means of a foreign trade. Foreign trade is carried out in goods and services, which includes imports, exports, and all the balance of foreign trade is presented separately for goods and for services. The total imports, exports, and balance of a foreign trade are presented as summaries of goods and services. And exporting refers to the selling of goods and services from the home country to your foreign nations. Whereas importing refers to the purchase of foreign products and bringing them to one's home country. Further, it is divided into two ways, which are direct and the second one is indirect mode. Every nation is blessed with certain resources, assets, and abilities. For instance, a few nations are rich in natural reserves, for example, petroleum products, timber, fertile soil, or valuable metals and minerals, while different nations have differences of these resources. And what are the advantages of import and export? It is one of the simplest routes of entering into a global trade, and import and export to generate huge employment opportunities, requires less investment in terms of time and money when contrasted with other methods of entering into the global trade, is comparatively less risky when compared with the different routes of entering in international business, as no nation can be 100% of self-sufficient. Import and export are very crucial for the functioning and the growth of the nation, and it can help countries to access the best technologies available and the best products and services in the world, and it gives better control over the trade than setting up a market, and the risk is considerably low. And what are the limitations of import and export? It includes extra packaging, transportation, and production and insurance cost, which build up the total cost of items. And exporting is not a doable in the event because that the trade foreign nations prohibits imports, and domestic organizations which are closer to the client could serve them better than firms outside their national borders. And merchandises are subject to quality standards. Any low grade merchandise which is exported will result in country reputation and remarks on countries. And obtaining licenses and documentations for foreign trade is a difficult and frustrating task, and as well as if you are not careful you can lose grip on the domestic market and existing customers. Okay, according to the Eric Goldstein, and how to start an import and export business in these 6 steps we need to follow. And interested in how to start an import and export business, get started with the tips from a successful entrepreneur. For nearly as long as there's been people, there's been trade. Imports and exports are how the potato come to Ireland, and in a more modern sense, it's how we are able to buy food, drinks, furnitures, clothes, and nearby everything else from all around the world today. Imports are any good or service brought in from one country to another, because while exports are goods and service produced in the home country for sale to the other markets. Thus, whether you are importing or exporting our product or both depends on your orientation to the transaction. The modern system of international trade is a complex web of import or export business that handle their sales in distribution and delivery of goods from one nation to another. If you are interested in starting a business in this industry, know that there is more than one type of import or export business. You could focus just on importing or just on exporting. You could be a manufacturer's representative or specializing in a certain industry, or you could be an import or export merchant or agent, which is more of a freelance broker. So starting an import or export business. If you are interested in starting an export or import business, there are a ton of considerations you need to make, just as you would for any type of business. For an import or export business specifically, it's helped to have a background in business, international relations, or global finance. This should give you an understanding of the migratory hoops one must jump through to sell or buy a product from an overseas supplier. The compliances make it so complex that even if you did not know how to do it, and you are still going to have to keep in mind a lot of random consideration, says Selena Cafe, a co-founder of Heritage Link Brands, a company that imports and exports and produces wine and other high-end products like tea and honey. Coffey worked for years in a brand management for Procter and Gamble, among other trade relations related positions, before starting her company in 2005. She was inspired after going to South Africa, where she attended the first Soweto Wine Festival. And Heritage Link Brands now operates within the wine industry in different ways. It imports wines from South Africa into the US wine market, as well as, and it exports grapes from its own South African vineyard to the United States, as well as the Philippines and Hong Kong. It also exports wine to airlines for use on international flights, and keeps reading for all these steps you need to take to start an import and export business, as well as tips from Coffee. So number one is get your business basics in order. Anything and anyone starting a business in the 21st century needs to cover certain bases like creating a website, as well as the social media channels like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and a host of others. So here's your first step: get the basics in order. This means registering your business with the state in which headquarters will be located, registering a domain name, getting any type of business licenses you need to legally operate, and so on. You will need a business plan too, because the part of the business plan needs to cover it. And for example, to bring alcohol and tobacco products into the United States, you need an alcohol and tobacco trade and tax bureau permit, which is free but can take months to acquire. Similar research needs to be done when doing business with other countries. So taking into account everything from various legal back label requirements in each nation's to insurance process vary greatly depending on the type of import and export business start. And because the first thing I recommend for anyone is to have your capital upfront, says Coffee. That's so much you can protect your business from not only a legal standpoint, but also the equity of the brand that you create, and to make sure that you invest in the quality of whatever you launch. Test a market or test a city, then a state, then a region. Then I think that there are a greater chance for success and sustainability long term. The ratios that Coffee cited for success in the wine industry: in order to make $1 million, you need to invest $7 million, demonstrates the kind of capital needed to start a business comfortably. If one can ever be comfortable as an entrepreneur and be prepared for whatever occurs from issues and with the sourcing to changes in their trade regulations process. And second one is pick a product to import or export process level. The next step in starting an import or export business is to find a product or industry you are passionate about and that you think could sell in international markets. For Cafe, that product turned out to be a wine. She felt connections to the product not just from a quality and a taste standpoint, but from a social justice standpoint as well. When I was first entered the industry in the year of 2005, there was just one black winemaker and five black-owned brands, Seychelles. And today there are 17 black winemakers and 31 black-owned brands. Though the South African wine industry still deals with injustices like poor working conditions and unequal access to capital, so Coffee says have improved since the previous decade thanks to the increased sales and notoriety of South African wines worldwide. The biggest thing that we have enabled is the financing of our black businesses. When we first got started, in order for even these brands to create their own wine, they had to source it from existing white wineries because they did not own any land, Coffee says. Once you find your product, you also need to identify the right market for it, because after all you need someone to sell it to, and this is the where your trend spotting skills come into play. The best products for an import or export business are products that are just starting to become popular, or some promises to being so in the future. So you can conduct research with the resources like Global Edges and Market Potential Index, or by checking with the local government officials and websites such as the Department of Commerce International Trade Administration's data and analysis. You can also find reports on the state of the imports and exports industries with the Census Bureau Foreign Trade. From there, it's best to start a slow and steady level. So test your ideas, says Coffee, because I don't assume that what you think will sell because you love it will catch fire in the market, and what catches fire in the more market because it's more than just the way it tastes. It's who you know, and the packaging and serendipity of timing and all of the indirect soft stuff that makes the differences level. And third one is source your suppliers. Once you have a product you would like to trade internationally, you need to find a local manufacturer or other product producer that makes your product and can lead to a strong partnership. A good relationship with the suppliers is crucial to long-running success in an imports and export business. Generally, you can find suppliers through companies like Alibaba, Global Sources, and Thomas Register. You will need to convince the suppliers of the benefits of entering the United States market or another market you will wish to sell to, and figure out the logistics of taking their product from their local warehouse or production facility to another one, potentially on the other side of the globe. You might also be your own supplier in some cases, as Cafe occasionally is for herself. And we own an own interest in a vineyard in South Africa called Silk Bush, she says, and my orientations when I do business to them is 80% of the grapes that we pick we send off to domestic wineries who use our grapes to produce their own proprietary high-end wine. The remaining 20% is used to create our proprietary label Silk Bus, which we export foreign markets. And fourth one is price your product level, because you know what product you are want to work with, and you have identified your target market. And the next step of figuring out how much to change and how much you charge. Typically the business model on an imports and exports business includes two key understandings, which one is the volume of units are sold and the commissions made on the volume. And be sure to price your product such as that your markup on the product and what ends up being your commission doesn't exceed what a customer is willing to pay. But you don't want to make it too low, such as because that you are not ever going to make a profit. In the import and export industries, importers and exporters typically take 10 to 15% of markup above that what the manufacturer charges, and you when you buy the raw product levels. And the fifth one is find your customers. Next up on how to start an import and export business, because the finding customers to sell out and deciding on a market is not the same as finding your customers. You cannot just send your products to the port of New York and start selling your wares on the docks to whoever walks by. You usually need to find the distributors and clients who will take on your product and sell to others. If you have a quality website that includes digital marketing campaigns, your customers may end up finding you. But to get started, Coffee suggests doing things the old-fashioned way by cold calling. Check with any local contacts where you have in the area and contact the area's chamber of commerce, trade consultates, and embassies, and so on. These entities might be able to give you a local contact list that could be a vital help in starting an imports and export business. I cold called the local Cambridge, Massachusetts Whole Foods store, and they gave me a chance. And now we do display programs and regional programs with Whole Foods, says Coffee. A lot of what I did in the beginning and even today involves the cold calls levels. And sixth one is get the logistics down. Perhaps the most complex aspect of importing and exporting is the logistics of taking a product created somewhere and selling it somewhere else. So how does the product make the trip from the vineyard of South Africa to the wine glasses of drinkers in California, for example? So when you're operating within a supply chain where your customers is different than your client, and which is different than your customers. It requires an extraordinary amount of coordination, says Coffee. I use a freight forwarder that one of my big off reaches out to shipping lines like Maersk. Hiring a global freight forwarder is generally a good idea for all imports and export businesses, as they will serve as a transport agent for moving cargo, saving you a lot of time and worry about getting your products from the factory to your warehouses. And essentially, you will give them information about your business and your intentions for the product, and they will arrange the shipping arrangements and agreements, insurance, and oftentimes the licenses, permits, tariffs, and quotas of working within the another country. So this can remove a lot of the headache associated with the storing and imports and export process business in an international trade market. So some of the risk of exporting level. So there are risks in relying on the export options, because if you are merely export to a country, the distributor or buying might switch to, or at least threaten to switch to a cheaper supplier in order to get a better price, or someone might start marking and making the product locally and take the market from you. Also, local buyers sometimes believe that a company which only exports to them is not very committed to providing long-term services and support once sale is incomplete or complete process level. So thus they may prefer to buy from someone who is producing directly within the country. At this point, many companies begin to reconsider having a local presence, which moves them toward one of the other entry options level. So exporting is a easy way to enter our international market, but in addition to exporting, companies can choose to pursue more specialized modes of entry, namely contractual modes or investment modes. Contractual modes involve the use of contracts rather than the investment process level. Okay, my dear students, I hope you have enjoyed this session now. Thank you once again. Thank you all.